Drug lord Amado Carrillo Fuentes gained worldwide fame after the release of the series Narcos Mexico. But in his Mexican homeland, legends were already being written about him during his lifetime, and now there is no end to the debate about whether Amado died or managed to change his appearance and continue his life under a different identity. But what did Carrillo Fuentes, known as the Lord of the Skies and Prime Minister, do to deserve such fame? How did he manage to cooperate and negotiate with almost everyone, his own compatriots, Colombians, and agents of many countries? And why is there not a single photograph in which Amado looks the same? All will be discussed in this video. Meet Amado Carrillo Fuentes on the other side of the law. Before you continue watching, I'd like to ask for your financial support of the channel. At the link in the description, you can find my store-branded merch with exclusive prints designed by me. If you have the opportunity and you like something, please buy it so you can help the channel to develop. Thank you in advance and enjoy your viewing. Little is known about Carrillo Fuentes' childhood and youth, but knowing the place and date of his birth, it's easy to reconstruct them. Since the beginning of his biography is not very different from the early life of El Chapo or Rafael Quintero, all of them came from the same poor but proud region with a glorious family tradition of smuggling, the state of Sinaloa. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was born in December 1954 in the village of Huamochilito, where almost half of the inhabitants were related to each other. His father and mother were farmers. There were 11 children in the family. He lived from hand to mouth, like everyone else around them, and the only way to get rich and rise above their station was to get involved in the drug trade. There are different opinions about how much education little Amado received, but most likely, like all his friends, he started working hard growing opium poppies and cannabis as soon as he finished elementary school. However, there is a version that he not only finished school, but he even studied for some time at the University of Culiacan. This version was confirmed by DEA agents, who referred to Carrillo Fuentes as well-educated in their reports. This is in contrast to El Chapo, for example, who never learned to read or write properly. According to a legend that still circulates somewhere in the foothills of the Sierra Madre, the future Lord of the Skies fell seriously ill as a child. It was a deadly virus called brucellosis, which Amado's parents could not afford to treat. The boy was wasting away before their eyes, and the local doctor threw up his hands in despair. Then Amado's mother Aurora took her son to an Indian medicine man, who performed a ritual. During the ritual, the medicine man died while fighting demons, but managed to drive the illness out of Amado. It's said that his soul moved into the boy's body, and Amado became a man with two souls, one noble and pure, the other dark as evil itself. Ordinary Mexicans love legends about the Jefe, and this is undoubtedly one of them. In any case, Amado's childhood and adolescence were uneventful. He did not die in a fight, was not shot by police during another raid on the village, was not imprisoned, and at some point in his youth, he went to work as an apprentice for his uncle Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, who went down in history as Don Nero. At first, young Amado worked on plantations. Then he was involved in transporting goods between states. In short, he did everything he could to climb the career ladder. Fonseca Carrillo was a seasoned drug lord, with a wealth of knowledge and an equally impressive track record in drug trafficking. His nickname, Don Nero, meant something like Mr. Best Price, and hinted at his negotiating skills. He had been in the business since the 1950s and worked for Pedro Aviles Perez, the first major drug trafficker from Sinaloa. Don Nero's word was law, not only in Sinaloa but throughout Mexico. By the end of the 1970s, it was the veteran Nero, together with ambitious young men such as drug lord Rafael Quintero and criminal genius Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, who would create the future Guadalajara cartel. All this time, his nephew Amado and later Amado's numerous brothers were learning the complex craft. According to many researchers, the Carillo clan was particularly rich in talented managers. Nero himself, Amado, his brother Vicente, and a couple of lesser-known names, true aristocrats in the Mexican drug trade. Amado absorbed knowledge like a sponge. One of the principles of the Guadalajara elite was to minimize violence. It was better to cooperate with other dealers than to compete with them. Of course, whenever possible. Another principle was family business. Relatives were less likely to betray each other. By 1982, the Mexicans began cooperating with the Colombians, who were having problems transporting cocaine. It was an impressive alliance, which I described in detail in my video about the Guadalajara cartel. The important thing to note about Amado is that the Sinaloans now needed to take control of the entire border area. And in one of the most convenient locations, the tiny border town of Ojinara, southeast of Ciudad Juarez, in the state of Chihuahua, the same man had been in power for 15 years, named Pablo Acosta. It was necessary to negotiate with him for a so-called subcontract, so that Acosta would store and transport Colombian powder along with his usual shipments of heroin and marijuana, using his tried and tested routes. In the future, Amado would move the distribution center from Ojinara to Ciudad Juarez, and the most notorious Mexican organization of the 1990s would be named after this city, Juarez. Until the mid-80s, Amado Carrillo Fuentes was a rank-and-file member of the organization. Moreover, he was officially a member of the DFS, or Federal Security Directorate in English, which was the Mexican equivalent of the FBI. He had a badge, and Amado participated in the Mexican side in the Buffalo Ranch operation, destroying the world's largest marijuana plantation, in which his uncle and Caro Quintero had invested. After Neto and Caro Quintero became the main suspects in the murder of American agent Kiki Camarena, the DFS fired more than 400 employees, and Amado was among them. In 1985, he was promoted within the cartel and moved to Pablo Acosta's fiefdom in Ojinara as a guarantor of cocaine deals with the Colombians. According to some sources, Amado had been living there since 1981, which explains how they managed to become such close friends. As in the series, the tired, aging Acosta wanted to retire, but according to the laws of the shadow economy, no pensions are allowed. He and Amado became friends, as is generally portrayed accurately in Narcos Mexico. However, in addition to the pure gold Rolex watches featured in the show, Carrillo Fuentes also gave Acosta a striking gold chain with a pendant in the form of a gold bar weighing about 1 ounce. Both the watch and the chain were worn by Pablo Acosta until his death. At that time, 31-year-old Amado was just a dot on the US authorities' radar and did not attract any attention. He lived in an elegant 3-story house on a hill in the center of Ojinaga, from where he could see the United States. Guards with automatic weapons stood watch outside his home. According to U.S. drug investigators, Amado was a young cowboy-clad drug trafficker who had served as a lieutenant in Guadalajara for the previous 5 years. He represented the interests of a powerful organization for which Pablo stored and transported cocaine. In the same year, 1985, Amado was arrested for the first and only time on the U.S. border. He was arrested for possession of weapons and gave a detailed account of himself, and his first photos were taken for his file. He was listed as a member of the Mexican MAFIA, calm and friendly, but at that time, his relationship with Pablo Acosta's organization was unclear to the Americans, as was the scale of the Guadalajara cartel. Colombian coke was becoming increasingly available. Amado controlled the shipments and at the same time learned the tricks of the trade from the seasoned Acosta. Over several decades, he built up his own system, paying off the right people, from police officers to politicians. At the same time, Acosta, accompanied by his young mistress from the US and the shrewd American journalist Terence Papa, was increasingly losing authority among his own people. Firstly, Pablo did not want to expand at the expense of cocaine. This meant that he would not be able to retire. Working with the Colombians was stressful and labor-intensive, requiring constant attention and constant modernization. Secondly, Acosta had become addicted to Colombian dope. According to Papa, he snorted and smoked cocaine from morning till night, which also did not add to his authority. Amado, young and daring, was eager to take his place, and such a moment presented itself. An interview that Acosta gave to Papa was published in a major American newspaper and instantly became a sensation. In it, he blabbed about everything, including his regular payments to the army and police, and literally the next day, the entire Mexican police force was looking for him. He was on the run for 5 months until he was finally shot dead in a house on the Rio Grande. Rumor had it that Amado paid $1 million to his friends at the DFS to make sure Acosta wasn't taken alive. In his book about Pablo Acosta's life, Terence Papa tells a telling story about how a rift developed between Amado and Pablo in 1986. During one of their meetings, they discussed a pressing issue. They had a large cache of cocaine somewhere in the desert, in an underground storage facility. It was a tank buried in the ground next to a landing strip for small planes arriving from Colombia. Such caches could hold up to 20 tons of blow at a time. Somehow, the Drug Enforcement Administration found out about the cache. and somehow Amado also found out that the DEA knew about the cash. Both Amado and Pablo were very concerned about the possibility of information leaking out. But Amado took matters into his own hands. Without consulting Pablo, he ordered 6 people involved in the hideout to be rounded up. The interrogation was thorough. Each person was tortured, forced to talk, and then killed. None of those killed turned out to be informants. Moreover, they themselves did not even suspect that there was an informant among them. Acosta, who preferred other methods of working with his people, flew into a rage when he learned of Amado's actions and demanded an explanation, calling the massacre senseless. "What have you done?" Acosta said. "You killed 6 people, and what did you achieve?" Amado replied sharply in a tone that left no room for further discussion. Better 6 innocent men die than 1 guilty man go unpunished. He would continue to adhere to this principle in the future. Nevertheless, after Acosta's removal, Carrillo Fuentes did not become the head of the Ojinaga. His former DFS boss, Rafael Aguilar, was appointed to the position. Aguilar brought nothing new to the table, preferring to follow the tried-and-true formula developed by Pablo. His previous position gave him unique opportunities. He knew all of the traffickers personally and was familiar with every detail of every deal, as well as being friends with Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. He had been deeply involved in the business for a long time, and it was believed that he negotiated with the Colombian Cali cartel in the early 1980s and successfully delivered shipments for them, while the young Amado was still nominally working for him at the DFS. The Juarez cartel, led by Aguilar, was characterized by 2 things: an unwillingness to adopt new methods of operation and ruthlessness. Of course, not on the same scale as in the future, but the cartel's enemies were often found with their heads cut off. Between 1986 and 1989, several important events took place. Amado Carrillo, much more ambitious and farsighted than Aguilar, was preparing for his rise. In 1986, when he was only 32 years old, he decided to start laying the foundations for his own business. Having learned his lessons from Gallardo and Acosta, he understood that he needed police protection. So he went to Tomás Cosa, a jeweler from Guadalajara who sold drugs to drug dealers and police, to ask him to introduce him to his boss, Federal Judicial Police Chief Guillermo González Calderoni. Once the meeting was arranged, the jeweler witnessed the negotiations. Calderoni and Carrillo Fuentes agreed on payments ranging from $100,000 to $500,000 per shipment of cocaine, depending on the volume. In 1987, Amado established a private aviation company in Torreón called Taxi Aéreo del Centro Norte, or Taxeno, which would transport more kilograms of cocaine than people, earning him the nickname Lord of the Skies. His method was to buy old passenger planes, remove the seats, and fill them to capacity with drugs. In this way, up to a ton of coke could be transported in a single flight. Transporting drugs by air was not Carrillo's invention, however, as the Sinaloans had been doing this since the 1950s. His fleet of small Learjet aircraft grew when he left prison in June 1990, and he even bought a used Boeing 727 for $300,000 to transport 5 tons of cocaine in a single trip. He later acquired 2 more aircraft of the same model, but the experiment failed due to the age of the plane. They often had to make emergency landings, and the associated maintenance problems, so he resumed flying a small aircraft carrying half a ton of coke per flight. In the year before, June 1989, Amado was arrested and imprisoned for a year. There are several versions of how this happened. There was a raid at a wedding party he attended. According to the first version, Amado was identified by his richly encrusted pistol, and since no one knew his face and such a weapon indicated high status in the organization, they decided to arrest him. According to another version, the raid was organized by the Arellano Felix brothers, who had a grudge against El Chapo, but he managed to escape, and in his absence, Carrillo Fuentes was busted. The third version states Amado was taken into custody pending clarification of the circumstances and tortured for 10 days to extract his name. In any case, in August of that year, Amado was sentenced to 12 months in prison for participating in a drug trafficking scheme. At the same time, the Mexican authorities, together with the Americans, put pressure on Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. According to some sources, Amado Gallardo and another of El Azul's bosses even spent some time in neighboring cells. Prison was, of course, a joke for bosses of this level. They had phones, quality food from restaurants, and the ability to run their businesses from a distance. In the same year, Felix Gallardo ordered the distribution of plazas among his loyal followers from prison. Since Amado was serving his sentence, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo was chosen to head the Ciudad Juarez organization. He remained in this position for 4 years, running it by inertia without any innovations, simply continuing to transport cocaine in significant quantities as Pablo Acosta had once done. In the same year, 1989, while Amado was in prison, the California State Police made the largest cocaine bust to date, an incredible 21 tons, in a warehouse in Los Angeles. The warehouse where the sensational find was made belonged to Rafael Munoz Talavera, a previously unknown restaurateur from an influential family. Several people arrested in connection with the seizure named Munoz as their leader, and accounting records showed that much more cocaine, hundreds of tons worth billions of dollars, had passed through the warehouse in previous months. It turned out that the Juarez cartel was not only run by Aguilar, but Aguilar wanted to eliminate his rivals, and according to rumors, it was he who facilitated the raid in Los Angeles, using his old connections and whispering in the right ears. By 1996, Munoz Talavera would be neutralized and removed from the power struggle, as he would be under investigation, and when he was released, he would conspire with the Arellano brothers to wrest power from the Carrillo Fuentes family, which had established itself in Juarez. But Munoz lost. In 1998, he was found dead. His body, mutilated by torture, was left in a parking lot as a warning. But let's go back a little. In 1989, while in prison, Amado did not waste any time. He managed to establish very lucrative relationships. Among other things, he bribed Adrian Carrillo Fuentes, a prison official who was later promoted to director of the Federal Judicial Police, with a Rolex gold watch. He secured the unconditional support of Miguel Angel, who was still powerful at the time. There are also stories that he convinced the deputy prosecutor for drug trafficking, Javier Coelho Trejo, with $4 million that it was time to get out of prison. And he really did serve only 9 months. An interesting fact, if you compare Amado's photo from a 1985 American report with his photo from a Mexican prison file, you see 2 different people, which suggests that he had already undergone plastic surgery, although there's no true evidence to support this theory. Once free, he continued to weave his own smuggling networks with the Colombians. According to Gallardo's division of territories, Amado could move between them and deliver his shipments. But that wasn't enough for him. He aimed to take place of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, who was already losing power at that point. In 1991, he met with the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, leaders of the Cali cartel, and agreed to cooperate. They were at the peak of their careers. Their empires spanned literally the entire globe, and unlike the Medellin cartel, they shared the same philosophy as Amado. Amado also began to establish ties with the military, in addition to the police protection he already had. But even with all this, he was not yet El Padrino. He still needed Juarez. He resumed his business relationship with Aguilar Guajardo, and in 1992, they jointly organized the transfer of 4 tons of cocaine to the U.S. from Cancun under the protection of González Calderoni. But a sad end was inevitable for Aguilar. Carillo needed his own turf to continue growing, and Aguilar Guajardo did not want to leave. In addition, there were rumors that he was snitching, although he himself seemed to deliberately complain constantly about the Mexican authorities who demanded so much money. Once, during dinner with Amado, Aguilar said that he would soon start turning in all these greedy bastards. A fight broke out between them and Aguilar slapped Amado. That time, Carillo simply left, but a few days later, Rafael Aguilar was shot dead with automatic weapons in the center of Cancun, accompanied by his family. Aguilar's right-hand man, Cuauhtémoc Ortiz, was kidnapped and his body was found a short time later in a jeep parked outside a shopping center with signs of torture and a bag over his head. By the end of 1993, the stars had finally aligned in Amado Carrillo's favor. Aguilar left this world. El Chapo Guzman, also claiming the throne, was arrested and imprisoned. Munoz was under arrest, and Amado's friend from prison, Adrian Carrillo Fuentes, was appointed director of the Federal Judicial Police. Carrera agreed to receive between $100,000 and $300,000 a month for providing protection, plus a luxurious cherry red Cadillac as a sign of respect. In this way, Amado Carrillo took control of the Juarez organization, where he attempted to revive the golden age of Sinaloa. To do this, he needed to subjugate the other organizations. His leadership was supported by his brothers Rodolfo and Vicente, The structures of drug trafficking organizations are pretty similar. Each one has a supply zone, transshipment, and logistics points, an armed wing, an intelligence and information gathering group, a network of political and police protection, and a unit responsible for finances and money laundering. Depending on the location and characteristics of the organization, some wings were better or worse developed. Some relied on force, while others, as in the case of Amado, relied on diplomacy. Carillo was a leader with an excellent ability to negotiate and form alliances. So in its early years, it was a non-military organization that rarely resorted to violence except in cases of attempted coups. Therefore, based on his vision, Amado began to build a new drug cartel, not through force, but through diplomacy, persuading everyone that working with him would be better and safer, primarily because of his connections in high places. Given that the DFS no longer existed, it had been disbanded after the murder of Agent Kiki Camarena as an irretrievably corrupt authority, literally a branch of the Guadalajara cartel. It was now needed to negotiate with the army and the federal judicial police, which was dependent on the ruling party. Unlike the Arellano Brothers organization in Tijuana, whose network of accomplices was local, state, and municipal police, Amado was only interested in federal agencies in his territory. Carillo believed that the best way to get maximum protection was to reach the most important figures in Mexico City. In the case of the military, he enlisted in the support of various generals, notably Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo, who had arrested him in 1989. He met with him on the grounds of another drug lord, El Azul, in the strictest secrecy, and then they met every 3 months to settle matters. At the same time, Carillo also sought and secured the support of the local police so that he would not encounter obstacles in his daily drug transportation operations, and so that he could use the police for dirty work, the kind of work carried out by hitmen. In this way, Amado created a modern and highly functional type of organization that was very profitable for everyone involved. He became a true leader, invisible and elusive, because he had learned well the lessons taught by Acosta. If you want to work, don't stand out. But power comes with risks. At the end of 1993, there was an unsuccessful attempt on his life. That evening, he was having dinner with his wife and 6 children, accompanied by 8 bodyguards, in a restaurant when about 10 people burst in and opened fire. 3 bodyguards were killed on the spot, while Amado and his family hid under the table. The attackers shot a random visitor at a nearby table and fled, probably thinking they had killed their target. Amado's plan worked. He was simply unrecognizable. It's believed that the murder was ordered by the Arellano brothers, who were in conflict with El Chapo, who himself was working with Juarez. Amado tried to balance between them and integrate the brothers into his system, but it was clear that they were against it, although at that point they were trying not to openly oppose Amado. After this incident, Amado, who loved his wife and 6 children deeply, strengthened his security system and went even further into hiding. Despite this, the Juarez cartel's business was going better than ever. The cooperation with the Cali bore fruit. Between 1994 and 95, the Lord of the Skies transported at least 7 shipments of cocaine for the Colombians. According to some sources, in the most successful month, 28 tons of goods worth $7 billion passed through Juarez's territory. But by 95, the good times were over. The Rodriguez-Orejuela brothers were arrested, and several small organizations formed in place of the Cali cartel. However, for Amado, these were only temporary challenges. He turned his attention to the Andes, Bolivia, and Peru. Until then, Medellin and Cali had monopolized cocaine production. They bought raw materials in those countries and produced cocaine hydrochloride in their laboratories. Before Amado, the Mexicans had always acted as transporters. The arrest of the Orejuela brothers changed everything. Even before that, the Mexicans had tried to reach suppliers in the Andes, but it was difficult. Now, despite the fact that Cali could still strike, Amado met with Luis Amado Pacheco, a Bolivian drug lord, and agreed on direct supplies, which was a real breakthrough in the Mexican drug trade. Now they could operate without the Colombians. The first 3 shipments were delivered without a hitch, but the 4th was seized in Peru. The Cali cartel still wielded power and handed the shipment over to the authorities. Pacheco was arrested and out of the game. Then Carrillo Fuentes, not wanting to get involved in a war with the dying but still capable Cali cartel, went to negotiations. There, he announced that the Mexicans wanted to protect their market and would continue to work with Bolivia and Peru. and if the Colombians wanted, they could accept Mexico's terms. The Colombians could no longer dictate their terms and had to agree. Profits declined, but so did the risks. In Colombia, the era of the cartelitos, small mobile organizations, was dawning. As a result of all this, Amado became the most influential man in Mexico. His federation-style organization included the biggest drug lords: El Chapo, Palma Salazar, El Azul, El Mayo, and a number of others, except for Tijuana and the Arellano Felixes, who did not want to join the federation. Transporting such large quantities of goods required ever greater capacity, and not just planes, but even submarines were used. Also in 1995, like the Cali cartel, Amado began to enter the world market, including the post-Soviet bloc. According to some US government estimates, the Juarez organization transported at least 60 tons of cocaine per year, which meant 120 flights, one every 3 days. But with great power comes great enemies. According to the most approximate estimates, Amado's profits amounted to about 25 billion USD, of which about 1 billion went to pay for state protection. But this was not enough for the insatiable politicians. Despite Carrillo Fuentes' terms, the Cali cartel put a bounty of $1 million on Amado's head. The Ochoa brothers from Medellin also had their sights set on Amado. Rumor had it that he had killed one of their family members, who disappeared without a trace in the 1980s, and whose body was found in the desert almost 10 years later. But the Colombians were far away, and politicians would not have launched an open attack. However, Juan Garcia Abrego, a drug lord from Tamaulipas, was extremely dissatisfied with the rise of the Sinaloans and Amado Carrillo Fuentes in particular, as the Juarez cartel began to claim his territory as part of a plan to unite all the cartels into one large federation. During the division into plazas, the territory of Abrego's uncle, the legendary Juan Nepomuceno Guerra, remained untouched. This was because Guerra represented the interests of his high-ranking patrons, including Raul Salinas, the president's brother, and they were not part of the drug federation, being government involved. Guerra's territory later became the Gulf Cartel, with a developed railway system and convenient access to Nuevo Laredo, which even today remains notorious for constant clashes. But Garcia Abrego was captured in 1996 and extradited to America, and he was replaced by Osiel Cardenas, known for creating Los Zetas. By the time Los Zetas consolidated their power, Amado was already dead, and Vicente Carrillo Fuentes and El Chapo would fight for Nuevo Laredo and the surrounding territories. However, after Abrego's arrest, and during the transition period of the struggle for power in the Gulf Cartel, Carrillo Fuentes and other Sinaloans took advantage of the situation to strengthen their power in the region. For a time, the Lord of the Skies organization became the most powerful group, not only in South America, but in the world. Meanwhile, pressure from the corrupt politicians intensified. In the summer of 1996, serious charges were brought against Amado and cases were opened against him for cocaine trafficking in Florida. Previously, Mexican courts had not dared to bring such charges, but they were forced to do so because of the Americans, who were demanding the arrest of major drug traffickers. This threw Carrillo Fuentes off balance. He had been addicted to crack since the 80s and had fallen into a state of severe paranoia. Amado began to seriously consider leaving Mexico and even sent a team of economists on a trip to South America to find the most profitable country for his investments. Argentina, Brazil, and Chile were considered. Chile seemed the most acceptable option thanks to its thriving economy. In fact, Amado's paranoia was not entirely unfounded. In early January 1997, an armed squad broke into the birthday party of Carrillo's sister, Aurora, with the aim of capturing Amado. However, he was warned just a few minutes before and managed to leave with his wife and children. There's a video of this failed celebration showing how exhausted Amado looked. He resembled a corporate executive who had not slept for several days while trying to resolve issues. This is perhaps the only video recording in which Amado Carrillo Fuentes appears. After this incident, he met with several high-ranking military officials for negotiations, and like any self-respecting drug lord, he offered a deal. The main message was this: Amado is a true patriot of Mexico and contributes to its prosperity as best he can. Therefore, he demands to be treated as a businessman, not a criminal. Politicians should accept his bribes without complaint and turn a blind eye to certain aspects of his business, in exchange for which they would receive a truly organized crime syndicate in the full sense of the word, which would be completely under his control, that is, no small, uncontrolled gangs. Drugs would not be supplied to Mexico, only in transit to the US and Europe. The Juarez cartel would never oppose the Mexican government. Moreover, the organization pumped so many US dollars into the economy of its home country that if Amado decided to leave, a real economic crisis would begin in the country. And there was no counter-argument to the last point. The largest oil company brought in $7 to $8 billion a year, while drug trafficking brought in $30 to $32 billion. The generals took $5 million from Amado for the meeting and refused. Carrillo Fuentes, like his predecessors, was unable to put pressure on the state, even with such peaceful methods, and so he left Mexico. In early March 1997, Amado Carrillo Fuentes visited Russia, then flew to Argentina, and from there to Chile, where he settled with his wife and numerous children. He ordered the transfer of $26 million from his account in New York and began looking for investment opportunities, attempting to buy a large bankrupt shipping company in Chile, with the obvious aim of transporting goods to North America. He also purchased several houses, apartments, and 11 luxury cars in Chile, clearly intending to start a new chapter in his drug career. In addition, Amado registered a company for money laundering. Everything was almost ready, but in the summer of 1997, Gutierrez Rebollo, Mexico's top drug enforcement official, appeared on the scene. The press discovered that for the previous 6 years, Rebollo, an uncompromising anti-drug crusader and anti-drug czar, as he was called, had been on the payroll of Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Moreover, he had been assisting him. It was thanks to Rebollo that the Juarez organization did not need an armed wing in its early years. The federal judicial police were used as personal bodyguards for Carrillo and other leaders of the organization. Gutierrez Rebollo was made famous by one of the biggest scandals in Mexican history. He personally eliminated Carrillo Fuentes' opponents using intelligence information. He stopped Guerrero Palma and knocked out the Arellano Felixes in the Pacific region and Guadalajara. Amado created an intelligence and attack unit called Los Arbolitos, which was paid for by Eduardo González Gerarte, also known as Flaco, who was Amado Carrillo's creditor and was responsible for his political relations in Jalisco. It included about 40 military, state, and federal judges who posed as federal agents and had wiretapping equipment in vans with the ruling party's logo. Its goal was to destroy Juarez's opponents. They arrested drug traffickers, especially from the Arellano Felix family, interrogated them, and then handed them over to Gutierrez Rebollo. Rebollo's arrest was a turning point, though. The Americans were once again convinced of how corrupt their southern neighbors were, and the Mexican authorities showed Amado who was really in charge. Although Rebollo's lawyer tried to prove that his client was the victim of a secret corruption war, he was unsuccessful. 2 months later, after the trial began, he was found with a bullet in his head. One of Rebollo's closest associates, Luis Vega, went on the run and was declared wanted. He was caught by the DEA, transported to the US, and after 10 hours of interrogation, he told them everything. Every layer of corruption that covered his homeland like a blanket. This did not bode well for Amado. The Clinton administration, seeing such a fall from grace, planned to capture Amado by any means necessary and put him in prison. In the summer of 1997, Carrillo Fuentes decided to undergo plastic surgery, which was supposed to make him unrecognizable to Uncle Sam. On July 3rd, he was admitted to the Santa Monica Hospital in Mexico City. The hospital apparently belonged to him. The operation lasted 8.5 hours and included liposuction and a complete facial transformation. The shape of his eyes, nose, and jaw were altered. The operation was successful, but in the morning, Amado was found dead. The death was caused by an overdose of anesthesia. And here, as always, there are several versions about it. The first is that Amado Carrillo Fuentes really did die. This is what the Mexican authorities announced. Fingerprints from the body were compared with 2 samples from 1985 and 1989, and they matched. The doctors who performed the operation were convicted, and sometime later, their mutilated bodies were found encased in concrete inside of barrels. According to this version, Amado was most likely killed on someone's orders, but the question was, who? It could have been his associates from Sinaloa, who had recently been unhappy with Amado's violation of the rules. He hung out, showed off around the country, and was often caught on camera. It would have been the Ochoa brothers who had finally waited for their moment to avenge the death of their relative. A wreath of black roses was found on Amado's grave with a meaningful inscription: "All good things come to those who wait," signed by the brothers. In addition, 2 of the surgeons were Colombian. It could have been the Mexican military. Amado had accumulated quite a few enemies. The second version is that Amado faked his death. The body in the coffin did not look like him at all, and it was badly decomposed. Nurses at the hospital allegedly saw a tall man leaving the building 3 hours after the operation. As a retired DEA agent once said, "We can't believe anything we hear from Mexico from Mexicans." Whether Amado Carrillo died on that fateful day or is still basking on a Cuban beach in beautiful company remains a matter of debate and controversy. Amado became a true hero of Mexican drug folklore, on par with El Chapo and Felix Gallardo. Legends are told about him and corridos are written, and the residents of his native village remember the Lord of the Skies with fondness. He looked after his homeland and helped its people. The locals instantly felt his absence, unlike in Juarez, which during his reign became a battlefield. Not as bad as it would be in the 21st century, of course, but still. Since 1993, the border town has been a zone of smoldering, then flaring conflict. With Amado's death, the idea of a drug federation would gradually lose its significance. His brothers and associates proved to be less diplomatic, while his opponents came up with new methods of influence that did not include cooperation with either the state or other drug lords. Only rule of force prevailed. By the early 2000s, El Chapo and Amado's younger brother, Vicente, nicknamed the Viceroy, tried once again to join forces and conquered Tamaulipas and the crossing to Nuevo Laredo. It was the same idea of restoring a dominant enterprise in all important border areas, only now under the leadership of Sinaloa. However, in 2004, ambitions destroyed the alliance between El Chapo Guzman and the Viceroy, and since then, everyone has been on their own. Thus ended the fruitful but short-lived years of cooperation and the project of Cartel Federation. Amado was the last to successfully and bloodlessly resolve issues by negotiating in the interests of business. Conflicts in the world left after him were resolved mainly by rule of the strongest, as agreements proved to be very fragile and incentives for betrayal and disloyalty were very great. It turned out that it was easier to hire a mini army than to try to bribe all the politicians, who would eventually betray the drug trade anyway, despite all the peace agreements. According to all those involved, a drug dealer would always remain a drug dealer.